Are you resourced? So, first off, some of you are like, what in the world does that mean? So, basically, being resourced means having the ability to navigate life in a way that is adaptable and mindful. So, imagine a boat and imagine a boat that's on rough waters. When the boat's doing, what we expect boats to do, as the waves crash, the boat is able to bob, it's able to stay above the water. There may be times that the big waves crash and the boat dips under, but it comes back up. Imagine the same boat on calm waters. It's able to flow and float just as it was meant to. That boat is able to flow and float just as it was meant to on calm waters. Those are examples of being resourced. That in rough waters, we're able to bob, stay above. We may go under a bit, but we come back up. And in calm waters, we're able to flow and float just as we are meant to. When we aren't resourced, that same boat on calm waters springs a leak that sinks it. When we aren't resourced, that same boat in rough waters gets split in half and capsized. If you're not picking up what I'm putting down just yet, you are the boat, and life is the state of the water. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes it's rough. Sometimes the boat is operating as we expect it to. Sometimes there's some things that we got to do to help with the maintenance of the boat. But in life, when we are not resourced, our leak, our split, our capsize looks like continuous cycles of unhealthy relationships. When we are not resourced, our leaks, our splits, our capsize looks like emotional breakdowns. It may look like dysregulation. It may feel really chaotic inside of you, even if it's not chaotic outside of you. When we are not resourced well, it could also look like chronic shame and self doubt. So, with being resourced, the tough part is one, we all need to be resourced. And two, while there's a lot of overlap, the way that it looks for each of us can be different. So there may be some specific examples that I use, and I invite you to actually look at how to make this fit for you. One person's being resourced can include being engaged in therapy. For some folks, that is necessary, a necessary part of their being resourced, or being engaged in some kind of medical treatment, depending on what's going on. Another person's being resourced could include having a plethora of independent activities. Again, there's a lot of overlap in what we all need in terms of being resourced, but the way that looks for each of us and what feels most in flow for each of us can be very different. So, are you resourced? In the same way that I started this, are you resourced? As the boat, do you feel like you are able to navigate rough waters? Do you feel like you're able to navigate calm waters? Some things that I like to ask folks whenever they are trying to just tap into if they are resourced, how they are resourced, or where they may benefit from some maintenance and some work. I like to ask folks, can you self soothe? Now, here's the thing. There's gotta be a second part to that question. Can you self-soothe in a manner that isn't destructive or that's not causing more issues? Because we can all self-soothe. People self-soothe with a bottle, people self-soothe with relationships, with sex, with food, with over-exercising, right? Like there's a lot of ways that we can self-soothe that turns into overindulgence. But can you self-soothe in a manner that isn't destructive and that doesn't cause more issues? Can you self-soothe in a manner that is truly supportive? When it comes to connecting with how resourced you are, again, from an internal standpoint, do you have a regular practice of self reflection? And does that practice of self reflection actually support you in making adjustments in your life? If you've got a practice of self reflection and maybe even have insight, but there's no action that's aligned with it, there's no action that comes from it, then you're not as resourced in that area as you would like to think. Knowing better, but being unable to do better is still lacking resources in that area. From an internal resources standpoint, do you feel like you have a sense of direction? And maybe if not a direct sense of direction, do you feel like you have a compass, something that supports you navigating yourself in your life? We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to have it figured out. And is there something that helps you navigate that unknowing or navigate life within and outside of yourself? When it comes to internal resources and being resourced, being able to have support from others indicates how resourced you are. So if you are a person that struggles with being vulnerable, if you are a person that struggles with other people being vulnerable with you, then that may be an area that you're not as resourced. Do you know, are you aware of what your capacity is and how to operate within it? Capacity is the amount that we are able to hold, and each of us have different levels. I may feel like I have the space and capacity of the Grand Canyon, and another person may feel like they have the space and capacity of a mustard seed. That is fine, but are you aware of it? And do you know how to operate within it and to support yourself within your capacity? That's a huge part of being internally resourced. Knowing what your capacity is, how much you can hold, and how to support yourself within that container. What I think about with that part is the saying where, folks say you can't pour from an empty cup. One, it's used a lot, and while I think it's helpful in some regards, I know that sometimes when things are used a lot, it can really be watered down, no pun intended. But when folks are saying you can't pour from an empty cup, a lot of times from a place of capacity, people say, "Well, if I have any water in the cup, then I could give that to other people. If I have any water in the cup, then I have space to do whatever that thing is." Having water in your cup does not mean you have enough to give away. And being able to feel the difference between those two things really speaks to being internally resourced. Just because I have water in my cup does not mean I have any to spare. It just doesn't. That would be a much longer conversation. So we're going to keep going past that part. We're talking about, are we resourced? And we're specifically looking at our internal resources and where those may be. From a stance of internal resources, do you feel like you have emotional intelligence? And I talked about this on another platform that you can access the replay and recording of called Clubhouse. But I talked about emotional intelligence. Are you emotionally intelligent? And when I ask that question, I am not just asking, can you identify feelings? Emotional intelligence is not just in being able to name what a feeling is. Our emotional intelligence speaks to the relationship that we have with those feelings, our awareness around them, and our ability to see where we may bypass emotions. Do you have emotional intelligence? Do you have a relationship with each of your emotions in a manner that gives you insight, in a manner that is able to help you navigate your behaviors when you feel these different emotions? Quiet as it's kept, our emotions don't need to be regulated. Our reactions to those emotions do, however. It's not our emotions that need to be regulated, in my opinion. It's our reaction to those emotions. Another piece when it comes to being internally resourced is your problem solving ability. For some people, when a problem arises, they are overwhelmed with stress or anxiety. They can experience that analysis paralysis, right? Or they can feel like they are dependent on other people to solve problems because they don't have the internal resources to do so. So, how you problem solve, and I'm not talking about the outcome, how you problem solve, that process of problem solving gives you an idea of how internally resourced you are. I've mentioned behaviors a little bit before. When I think of internal resources, I also think of how much control a person feels like they have over their own behaviors. And we hear things all the time where folks say, you know, this person brought me out of character, or it's like something just came over me, or when I get mad, when I get sad, as if that is a given and a 100% out of our control occurrence. Now, it is important to say that those pathways can be really strong and can be out of our consciousness, out of our direct consciousness, I'll say. And it's our responsibility to build upon that consciousness and to build upon our ability to shift that direct pathway and do something different. There's lots of things that can happen there and lots of ways to work through that. And when it comes to being internally resourced, how much say you feel like you have over your own behavior is indicative of how resourced you are internally. Our thought process is also a resource or a hindrance. Our thought process can be a resource or it can be a hindrance. If I have the ability, not just to problem solve, but to have flexible thinking in a way that's not rigid, in a way that allows for new information, in a way that actually supports making sense of things and critical thinking, that's absolutely an internal resource. Another internal resource is your practices of how you nourish your body. How well do you take care of you in physical form? What I've said before, it speaks to how well you take care of yourself mentally. It speaks to how well you may take care of yourself spiritually, especially when it comes to self reflection and connecting with yourself and connecting with the world around you. But a part of our internal resources is also how well you nourish your body, not just in terms of food and what you consume, but in terms of information and how you consume it. How do you nourish your body with rest? How do you nourish your body with the people that you choose to be around, with the shows that you tend to watch, with the way that you spend your time? How do you nourish your body with movement in whatever way that looks for you and your abilities and limitations? How do you nourish your body? That speaks to internal resources. With our external resources, if you are trying to see how resourced you are, check in with yourself. Do you have community? Do you have community? And what community means for me is having people that are an active part of your life that you can lean into and that can lean into you. People that invite you to show up fully within yourself. People that you have a deep and a visceral soul connection to. That's what I mean by do you have community? That's a huge external resource. And I meet a lot of people who have some friends sometimes. I meet some people who don't also, but I meet a lot of people who have some friends, but when they're asked that question in that way, they say, I don't really have community. And sometimes that's because of their own fear of vulnerability and connecting with people. Sometimes it's because they just haven't put themselves out there to develop it. Sometimes it's because of their beliefs that community is just kind of supposed to happen, that things are just kind of supposed to pop up. And while I think some of that is true, community isn't something that has to be forced necessarily, but it is something that you have to put yourself in a position to receive, in a position to see and acknowledge. That community is not just going to pop up in my home. It's in being able and being willing to connect with people and also feeding those relationships, maintaining and strengthening and developing those relationships. So, from an external resources standpoint, do you have community? Do you have those people that you really can connect into that really invite you to yourself? Do you know where to go for assistance? So external resources is, it's related to our mind, body, and soul, but it's also related to our basic needs. So in terms of being externally resourced, do you have what you need? And if you don't, do you know where to get it? Do you know how to go about figuring out how to get it? That can look like therapy, assistance with therapy, with coaching, with medical doctors, with food, with shelter, and any other thing that we need, basic needs, emotional needs, and otherwise. Do you know where to go to get what you need? And if you don't know where to go to get what you need, do you know how to go about figuring it out? So I want to ask again, are you resourced? Do you feel internally resourced? Do you feel externally resourced? When it comes to being resourced, there are some things that we can do to develop and deepen into this place. So, one of the things that I want to lead with is the recognition that learning has to be intentional. We go to school for years and years and years to be able to get number one, a lot of information that just kind of goes by the wayside at a certain point. But even past grade school and those fundamental, things, we go to school or we develop trades, we have on the job training, we have all of these things that's put in place as adults to develop these skills and these learnings and this knowledge that we need in order to work. But there's not a natural place of which we have to go through soul work training, personal growth training. That has to be done by us on purpose. There are absolutely places you can do that. YouTube is one of them, where you can gather information that's centered around your personal growth. There are classes and courses, there are coaches and therapists, there are all kinds of people, there are communities that centered around soul work and personal growth. There's so many resources out there, and you have to go for it intentionally and on purpose. When you're looking to develop and deepen into your resources, put yourself out there, gather information, ask questions, look around to see who may be doing, and by doing, I mean being, who seems to be who and what you are looking to strengthen and gather within your own life. That doesn't just work with professions, right? Like, I really want to be a barber, so I go and job shadow a barber or talk to them about their profession. The same thing works with soul work. You are living in a way that feels really aligned with me or what I'm working toward. Could you tell me more? Could we develop relationship? Could I follow you? Could I like, share, subscribe? Could I tap into what you have going on so that I can develop this consistent learning and study from this soul work and personal progress perspective? The other piece when it comes to developing and deepening resources, and we're talking, lots of mindset and practice right now, is once you learn something, it is not necessarily going to be easily implemented for you. The first time you learned the alphabet, you didn't hear a run through and speed through it. The first time you got training for your job, you didn't just get one piece of training and then go off to the races. I laugh a little bit because some of our professions feel like trial by fire. So maybe you did get one piece of training and then you were kind of tossed out there. And it could have been a lot simpler to have been fully trained and fully prepared for the role. So I just want to put that aside on there. But the point of that is that as you learn something, it is not necessarily about learning and doing and now it's fixed or now it's changed or now I've got this resource. It is learning, it's deepening, it's study, it's practice, it's relearning. And each thing that we learn, I find when it comes to soul work and making, personal growth of value and a practice of yours, each thing that we learn, we are typically unlearning something too. So I say all of this to say, be patient with your learning as much as possible. Be patient with your learning. Hold compassion for yourself. Really try to reduce this pressure and timeline of when and how something is supposed to get done. When we are developing and deepening our resources, there's some things that may happen pretty quickly, but for the most part, especially when it comes to long-term shifts and sustainable change, it takes time. It takes practice. It takes study. So that also means when you try different things, it's not like a one and done. It's not even a three and done, like, oh, I tried it a few times, it didn't seem to work. That's not quite how it works. The study and the practice is something that has to happen over time. So give yourself that space. Another thing before I talk about some specifics is just being able to understand that learning is the process of life. Okay. Learning is the process. It's not a process. It is the process. So being resourced is in having an ability to navigate the not knowing and the uncertainty to a certain extent. It's the ability to lean into the journey and to find fulfillment within the journey rather than looking to get to this destination and then feeling better or then feeling more fulfilled. If I go back to the boat example, if the focus were on the destination, as the boat springs a leak, and I'm just like, well, I'm not too far from the island, let's just keep going. No, I gotta address the leak. I gotta be in the boat. I gotta attend to the boat as we go, not just focus on where I'm looking to end up. I always invite people when it comes to developing and deepening resources to just take inventory of what you currently have access to. What are the internal resources that you already have access to? It could be a sense of humor. It could be your ability to think through things, could be your ability to identify how you're feeling, even if you have a hard time figuring out what to do past that point. Maybe your internal resources that you are largely unshakable, that you're really steady and stable. Maybe you have an internal resource of being willing to ask for help or of being vulnerable with other people. All of those things, take inventory. What do you already have access to? And then deepen into or start to research, look for what are some practices for my mind that would be supportive to me? What are some practices for my body that would be supportive for me? What are some practices for my soul that would be supportive to me? How do I want to go about gathering this information? Is there anybody in particular that I feel called to? In terms of internal resources, are there things that I maybe need to let go of or release in order to be more resourced? Are my basic needs met? And when it comes to identifying those external resources, same thing. What do I already have access to? Maybe you already have access to having food, water, shelter. Maybe you already have access to community or access to friends who may be able to develop into community. Maybe in terms of external resources, what you already have is an ability to access information. That's huge. So when you're looking to develop and deepen there, really explore how can I build, strengthen, and or maintain community? How can I be a better community member? Talk to different people about how they get information, where they get their information from. Talk to people about how they access resources. If you have a gap in a basic need, that's usually a priority. That's usually a priority. So when you're looking to develop and deepen external relationships, really explore information and resources. There's so many things that are out there, like workshops, classes. I was naming a number of things before, coaches, therapists. Look on, look in your area, look on your local search engines or some of the major search engines, and you can look up different events and things near you so that you can be in more spaces to develop the type of resources that you need. When it comes to developing and deepening resources, really it boils down to your willingness to check in with yourself, your willingness to explore yourself and to be curious, your willingness to be vulnerable, and your willingness to ask for feedback. If you have that practice and that ability to check in, to explore, to be curious, to be vulnerable, to ask for feedback, that will support you in developing internal and external resources so that you can move through life in a way that feels rooted and stable, even when things get a bit chaotic. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time.